Fight back.
Fight back.
Fight back.
Fight back.
Who got to fight? Who got to fight back?
We got to fight, we got to fight
I
back.
said, who got to fight? Who got to fight back?
We got to fight, we got to fight
I
back.
said, who got to fight? Who got to fight back?
We got to fight, we got to fight
I
back.
said, fight back.
Fight back,
Fight back.
fight back,
Fight back.
fight back,
Fight back.
fight back.
The beat so mean, the hook on throwback. Headbanger boogie, people show me where yo throw that. 2017 got a presidential host at. Invited Kanye over just to prove that he was pro-black. 2 Oompa Loompas on the Kodak. Quote that. 2 million marching in the protest. Progress, confess. I've been waiting on this since 06. Invoking Willie Lynch will get little Willie hit. Don't get Becky Bobby stitched on some Marcus Garvey shit. Fit for the battle, rock the fit to the battle. APC denim and some vism with the tassel. Mind on vegan, pockets on White Castle. Embrace my contradictions cause my truth is who I battle. Marching down the street, some trans, some queer. Sisters in the front and my goons in the rear. And we here to fight the system till these labels disappear, huh? Who got to fight? Who got to fight back?
We got to fight, we got to fight
I
back.
said, who got to fight? Who got to fight back?
We got to fight, we got to fight
I
back.
said, who got to fight? Who got to fight back?
We got to fight, we got to fight
I
back.
said, fight back.
Fight back,
Fight back.
fight back,
Fight back.
fight back,
Fight back.
fight back.
Picking sign parties is how we turning up. School to prison pipeline is how we growing up. Granny lost a pension, a house that she loves, and you wonder why we out here on the corner selling drugs. Middle finger up to the upper 1%. Daily making millions when we barely making rent. Throwing pennies at my student loans and barely made a dent. Sally making either dicks, well I'm tired of this shit, but I'm coolin'. Sitting with my fam and we moving. Something about being black blocks of fear of losing. Oppression or liberation, which option are you choosing? Who's in? Load up the beamer and bend. How many gonna be there? Probably 10. It ain't about the numbers, fam, we getting this win. And after this win, we gotta do it again. I said again and again and again and again. Who got to fight? Who got to fight back?
We got to fight, we got to fight
I
back.
said, who got to fight? Who got to fight back?
We got to fight, we got to fight
I
back.
said, who got to fight? Who got to fight back?
We got to fight, we got to fight
I
back.
said, fight back.
Fight back,
Fight back.
fight back,
Fight back.
fight back,
Fight back.
fight back.
How you get closer to love? How you eliminate all your sadness when you opening up? How you make excuses for billionaires you broken a bus? I need niggas around me rolling up and smoking me up. Because when rainforest cries, everybody dies a little. And I just wanna dance tonight. And I just wanna dance tonight. Yeah, he my little baby Medusa, tipping the juice up. I go back and forth in a Uber, travel for 2 months. I'm the emptiest hallelujah. Open my chest up, it's a rabbit inside my hat. Angel all dressed up, looking to bless up at the milk and the honey gas. I make money for money's sake. I've been writing 100 days. Took the wretched out the earth and called it baby for 9. I know my shoulder blades are shattered wings to carry me home. I said, baby, come on. You know this flesh is only temporary, brittle as bone. Why don't you empty out your love for me, then chisel the stone? These are 10 black commandments, a property loan. Cause every blade of grass of earth we don't actually own. I am the I am, says Sam, am I? The universe bleeds infinity, you got one life. Yeah, how you get closer to love? How you eliminate all your sadness when you opening up? How you make excuses for billionaires you broken a bus? I need niggas around me rolling up and smoking me up. Because when rainforest cries, everybody dies a little. And I just wanna dance tonight. I just wanna dance tonight. If you think you love me, then bury me when the sun up. Faded with the homie, pearling another blunt up. Talking to Muhammad like niggas don't really trust us. Dying on stolen land for $1 like that ain't fucked up. It's fuck they money. I'ma say it every song until the revolution coming, all the feds start running. Fuck a Goodwill Hunting, this is brand new murder. Revolutionary suicide, then close the curtain. And you ain't seen death, I can hear the blood on the moon. These niggas put a flag up on it, all they do is consume. Only animal to ravage everything in its path. They turned a natural resource into a bundle of cash. Made the world anti-black, then divided the class. Now the rich niggas is rich niggas with showbread, really bitch niggas with big figures. Some cokeheads, these bitches is cokeheads, man. Fuck a billionaire, How you nigga. get closer to love? How you eliminate all your sadness when you opening up? How you make excuses for billionaires you broken a bus? I need niggas around me rolling up and smoking me up. Because when rainbows cries, everybody dies in love. Everybody dies in love. And I just wanna dance tonight. I just wanna dance tonight.
Hello, I'm Emmanuel Garcia, and I'll be your MC tonight. I'm delighted to welcome you to Seeds of Change, Rooted in Radical Joy, a virtual fundraising event and celebration of activism and organizing in Chicago. Thank you for joining us. For 3 nights, we'll gather at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, starting tonight. Tomorrow, we have an awards presentation that will feature a conversation with this year's awardees, Brave Space Alliance, Good Kids Mad City, and Shine Nation's Youth Council. The talented Jamila Woods will moderate the panel. That's right. And Jamila Woods will be back on Friday with an exceptional musical performance that you don't want to miss. I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors. Because of them, we can make our program accessible and share our message far and wide. Our leadership circle, Resource Generation Chicago, Chicago Foundation for Women, Grand Victoria Foundation. Our catalyst, John D'Amelio, Susan Eleuterio and Tom Sorlis, Dale and Ruth Fast, the Joseph and Bessie Feinberg Foundation, McAlpine Consulting for Growth, Irving Harris Foundation, Zach Hulsing and John Lehman, Pierce Family Foundation, Carlene Schroeder, Paul Lehman and Rana Stam. To view a full list of our sponsors, visit our website at crossroadsfund.org. A special shout out to our champions, our 2021 host committee, who are probably making a cocktail as we speak. Cheers. Thank you for being the best party hosts ever. Thank you for making our community tonight even bigger. I want to give a big shout out to the Crossroads Fund Board of Directors. Raise your virtual glass. This is an amazing and dedicated group of people who work very hard to make Crossroads Fund a solid and stable organization. I also want to thank my colleagues at Crossroads Fund who make this night and everything we do possible. Christina Roque, Ed Vogel, Katie Madden, Alexis Sanchez-Boizo, Lizette Garza, Michael Agujar, John Lehman, and of course, Jane Kimondo. This team is mainly responsible for making this night happen. And special thanks to all the volunteers who build our capacity throughout the year. We know some of you may be new to Crossroads Fund tonight, so we wanted to let you know a little bit more about our work as a movement funder here in Chicago. Crossroads Fund is a public foundation that provides resources for groups working on racial, social, and economic justice. Boldly, we raise money and then we give it out. We give it to the groups on the front lines of change. Last year, we gave out $1.2 million in grants and in addition, direct resources to 136 groups. This year, we're celebrating a milestone year as Crossroads Fund turns 40. 40 years rooted in radical change. In that time, we've given out over $12 million to over 900 groups. We couldn't do any of this work without you. You are the activists. You are the donors. On our 40th anniversary, we want to say thank you to our founders. The founders of Crossroads Fund had a vision that a community foundation could support small grassroots groups and create radical change. 4 decades and $12 million in grants later, we can see the results. An end to the death penalty in Illinois, wheelchair accessible public transportation, historic improvements in labor law, immigration policies, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, and more. A virtual toast to their radical vision and the winds of the past 4 decades and the future ones too. Our goal this year at Seeds of Change is to raise $200,000. One way you can support is to participate in our online auction. This year, there are over 150 items to bid on, and it's thanks to the businesses and individuals who donated gift certificates, artwork, services, jewelry, books, their weekend home, and so much more. Be sure to give these progressive businesses your support when you can and let them know that Crossroads Fund sent you. The online auction is open to all and will close this Friday, March 19 at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. So bid high and often. It's for a good cause. And now for the main event, our special guest. I'm honored to introduce Amy Goodman. Amy Goodman is the host and executive producer of Democracy Now!, a national, daily, independent, award-winning news program airing on over 1,500 public television and radio stations worldwide. Goodman has co-authored 6 New York Times bestsellers. Her latest one, Democracy Now!, 20 Years Covering the Movements Changing America, looks back over the first 2 decades of Democracy Now! And the powerful movement and charismatic leaders who are reshaping our world. And she'll be joined in conversation with my colleague and comrade in this work day in and day out to grow resources for building movements in Chicago. Crossroads Fund's Executive Director, our fearless leader, Jane Kimondo. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you, Emmanuel, for those kind words. So grateful to you. Hello, Crossroads Fund friends, family, and colleagues. We're so happy that you're here tonight. Thank you for responding to our invitation to join us at our virtual celebration, Seeds of Change, Rooted in Radical Joy. Manny just said we're going to invite Amy Goodman to the conversation. But before we do that, it feels important to ground ourselves with what is happening around us. Yesterday, there was yet another incident of hate in Atlanta, driven by white supremacy and anti-Asian sentiments. In Chicago, 15 people were shot and 2 individuals died during a mass shooting over the weekend. We're also marking the 1-year anniversary of Breonna Taylor's killing and the 1 year of a global pandemic. This is our reality, and this is why we do the work that we do. As we mark the first full year of the pandemic, we remember those we have lost, those who survived the virus and are living with the side effects, those among us who are facing economic hardship and lack of basic necessities such as food, water, shelter, and access to healthcare. The pandemic has indeed been hard on all of us, but the impact has not been equally distributed. Arundhati Roy says the pandemic is a portal. It is indeed a portal, which has made visible all the fault lines that have always existed in our society. It has left historically vulnerable members of our community exposed to the elements of unabated capitalism and unresponsive systems. It is at this intersection of systemic failures and marginalization that both Crossroads Fund and Democracy Now! Works at. Both of our organizations have a lot in common. For instance, both of us believe in the full dignity of all human beings, no exception. We believe in justice that brings us peace. We believe that the people most affected by all natural and man-made issues have the best solutions, and their voices should be amplified, listened to, and heard. Finally, we believe that the work we do brings us all closer to that democracy that is inclusive, generative, and people-centered. So before Amy comes onto the virtual stage, I'd like to tell you what to expect. Amy will share some reflections with us, and thereafter, I will ask her a few questions. So you, our invited guests, we invite you to share your reflections, thoughts, affirmations, and questions using the chat feature throughout the program. By now, we are all pros at using that chat feature. So go forth and start it. As I bring Amy into the conversation, I will try not to fangirl too much, but I'm a big, big fan. Amy, welcome to Chicago. Welcome to the Chicago Crossroads Fund community, and welcome to Seeds of Change.
It's such an honor to be with you and to be here celebrating 40 years of the Crossroads Fund.
Right. Thank you. Amy, the last year and now has been heavy on us, as I alluded in my remarks. For me, it has been very hard to stay focused, to keep hope alive, or make sense of all that is thrown at us. Given that our event is about radical joy, and that in everything we have to find those kernels of joy, I can say for myself, joy has been binging on Netflix like everybody else, long walks, and joining my teenagers watching TikTok videos that make absolutely no sense. That's what my life has been reduced to. What about you? What has brought you joy, Amy?
Well, I think it's the community that maybe we can't all be together physically as we usually are. My community at Democracy Now!, my family, friends, a new pandemic puppy who we've named Zazu. Zazu is a Timorese name for little puppies, but also, and I'm also saying this because in case we have some little interruptions, we're just getting used to each other and our presence. I have to see how much you'll appreciate me not paying attention to her right now. But Zazu were the young resistance activists, anti-fascist, anti-Nazi activists of World War II in occupied France, who loved jazz and swing, went to the underground clubs and the expat musicians, for example, from the United States, but also fought the Nazis. And their symbol, the yellow, a yellow armband that's with the Jewish star in it, it said Zazu. So little Zazu might pop in her head at some point, but maybe she'll leave us alone because she knows how important tonight is.
Yes. And when we go out into the marches and everywhere else, we'll be looking out for Zazu. So Amy, the floor is yours. Thank you so much. And I'll be right back with some questions.
Well, Jane, thank you so much. And thank you, Manny. And thank you to all of the people, not only in Chicago who are watching, but in this country and around the world who tune into Democracy Now! Crossroads Fund is celebrating 40 years. Democracy Now! Is celebrating 25 years. We began in 1996 as the only daily election show in public broadcasting. We were only going to go for 9 months. We were covering the election. And then we were going to pack up. It was a project of Pacifica Radio. But there was more demand for it after the election than before, because we use the election as a way to go from state to state to see what were people doing at that time. Why weren't most people voting? When I was called by Pacifica to host this show, I was in Haiti in a underground house. And we were covering people who would announce to run for office. They would be gunned down. people who voted could be gunned down at the polls, and yet the vast majority of Haitians voted. So when I was asked to do an election show in the United States, I was thinking, but most people don't vote. Although the United States is the most powerful country on earth, and it does matter. I never thought people were apathetic. I wanted to know what they were doing in their communities and what were the obstacles to voting, which has become such a supreme issue today. Stacey Abrams, the leading voting activist in Georgia, as you all know, what she recently said is more than 250 bills are put forward across this country to once again try to stop particularly people of color and poorer people from voting. She said, this is just Jim Crow in a suit and tie. And back then, 25 years ago, looking at the importance of what the United States represented in the world, I was interviewing a woman from Guyana on a different issue. She was a grassroots activist with, I think it was called the Red Thread Collective. And we were going on to talk about the U.S. elections. And, you know, in our music breaks, which are so fantastic, and I credit my team for coming up with those wonderful music breaks. If you all tune in at democracynow.org, the music that says so much, the culture of resistance. We use those during non-pandemic times to move guests in and out of the studio. Now we're all separate. We're alone in our different spaces, and we're interviewing them from afar. But at that time, the music break to move our guest out and our guests on the U.S. elections in. And she said, no, I'm going to stay right here, and I'm going to continue to talk about the U.S. elections. I said, oh, but why do you want to stay for the U.S. election segment? And she said, because I believe everyone should get to vote for president of the United States. That just shows the power that the United States has. Now, 25 years ago, it's hard to believe what was relevant then is so relevant today. You know, Democracy Now! Is a separate nonprofit, but we came out of the Pacifica Radio Network, founded after World War II by a war resister named Lou Hill, who came out of the detention camps of California and said there's got to be a media outlet run by corporations that run by journalists and artists, not by corporations that profit from war. And that's how Pacifica was born. Not run by corporations, as George Gerbner, the founder of the Cultural Environment Movement, said, not run by corporations that have nothing to tell and everything to sell, that are raising our children today. And so KPFA in Berkeley, 49, KPFK in Los Angeles, 1959, my station in New York, WBAI, 1960, WPFW in Washington, 1977, KPFT in Houston, 1970. That's the 5 core stations. And why is it so relevant today? KPFT goes on the air in 1970. And within a few weeks, they're blown up by the Ku Klux Klan. KPFT gets their transmitter back online, and in a few weeks they go back on the air, and the Klan straps dynamite, 15 times the dynamite, to the base of the transmitter and blows it up again. It would take months then for it to go back on the air in 1971. I can't remember if it was the Grand Dragon or the Exalted Cyclops, because I often confuse their titles, but he said it was his proudest act. Why? Because he understood how meaningful it was for people to speak for themselves. And that's what's important today, is to have a media and to have highlight organizations where people are determining their own future, whether you hear a Palestinian child or an Israeli grandmother, a kid from the South Bronx or from Chicago, or from Standing Rock Reservation in North Dakota. And you may not know these people, but you say, it sounds like my aunt, my uncle, it sounds like my brother or my friend who I don't even like. But at least you come to know where they're coming from. It makes you much less likely to want to destroy a person when you understand why they think the way they think. that understanding is the beginning of peace. I think the media can be the greatest force for peace on earth. Instead, all too often, it is used as a weapon of war. And that's why the media has to be a part of grassroots activism all over this country and around the world, because it frames the story. Jane, you brought up the horror that we've seen in the last 24 hours, that horror in Atlanta, with the killing of 8 people. A number of them, the majority of them, Asian Americans and women. And I watched the news conference today, and I saw one of the police spokespeople talk about the shooter, who they were able to get. And he said, no, he does not describe this as a hate crime. And I thought, wow, the first framing of this is the killer, how he views this, and not the communities, not the victims. And that's why democratic community media is so important, because it gives primacy to the people who are at the target end of the hate. And that's why Pacifica Radio 25 years ago is as relevant today. And as we speak today, a new report has just come out showing the level of white supremacist violence in the last year has at least doubled, the incidence at like 14 times a day. Attacks just in this country alone. We know that the greatest fear right now of domestic terrorists is the white supremacists and the far right groups that have not been targeted because of the politics of those who've occupied the White House for the last years, redefining White House. Before we have our conversation, as I look at all the activism that's going on now, that is really what gives me hope. And that at Democracy Now!, what keeps us going every day. When this pandemic began a year ago, we were the first in New York to close up. We saw the danger, did not want to endanger our staff, close our offices, but continue the broadcast. We never stopped. Our colleagues, a few of them come in every morning. We operate with a skeletal staff. We're separated from each other to protect each other from each other, sadly. But we are, as everyone got a mug this year, the quarantine. Our whole team, whether we're working at home or we're working in studio, we are there together. And I see the media as a way to bring everyone together all over the country and all over the world. I see the media as a huge kitchen table that stretches across the globe, that we all sit around and debate and discuss the most important issues of the day, war and peace, life and death, and anything less than that is a disservice to a democratic society. So how do we ensure that independent media is out there, is supported? And when I say supported, I mean viewed and watched and shared and discussed, and people are a part of it every which way. And I think back as we see the battles going on now in Minnesota over the Enbridge line, because we've got the pandemic that has exposed like an X-ray the inequality in this country. So relevant, we're here today as Pramila Jayapal, the head of the Progressive Caucus, has just introduced a Medicare for All bill, and how critical that is. The corporate media does cover the pandemic. But when we're talking about people's health every day, where are the discussions about Medicare for All? That's the reason that we have this huge disparity in communities of color dying at such higher rates than white people, whether it's African Americans, the Latinx community, Native Americans. And this is larger than this pandemic. It has been true for a long time. And now, as we all look together at this, we have to come up with solutions. And I fear they won't be debated and discussed in a media that stops every 5 or 6 minutes for a drug commercial or for a commercial from the insurance industry. We need independent media. Or when we cover inequity in this country, we're not brought to you, the financial institutions, we're not brought to you by the banks. When we cover the climate crisis, we're not brought to you by the oil, the gas, the coal companies, but brought to you by listeners, viewers, readers like you. And a huge shout out to WZRD in Chicago and Can Television that broadcasts Democracy Now! Every morning, this daily grassroots global news hour. So the primacy of voices, people speaking for themselves, our philosophy, also our tagline, the exception to the rulers. I think back a few years to 2016. That was a big election year that determined so much in this country. Now, during the presidential debates, was one question asked about the climate crisis? No. Sometimes they don't even call them journalists, but by these media personalities of the candidates. And then that's when the candidate becomes president, determines the kind of agenda they set. So at that time, you had this epic standoff in North Dakota, right? The standoff at Standing Rock. It was April 1st, 2016, when LaDonna Bravable Allard, the unofficial historian of the Standing Rock Sioux, opened her property and said, if anyone wants to come here along the Cannonball River and set up your teepees or your tents and resist what they called the Black Snake, the Dakota Access Pipeline, I opened my property to you. It became the Sacred Stone Camp. And she thought maybe a couple dozen people would come. And then there were hundreds, and then there were thousands. And it was astounding. The Red Warrior Camp, Sacred Stone Camp, and so much more. Indigenous people from Latin America, from the First Nations of Canada, from the United States, and their non-native allies all gathered to not only take on the Dakota Access Pipeline that would take the back in oil fields, oil from North Dakota down through the United States to the Gulf of Mexico. They were not only doing it to protect their land, their sacred land, but the land for everyone, how you develop a sustainable future and be at the table when that is discussed. And that's what we went on Labor Day weekend of 2016 to record, to document, to bring to the global audience of Democracy Now! And what we found was astounding. People resisting, going to a property. They thought they were just going to plant their tribal flags. And then they saw bulldozers on a holiday weekend digging up the land that a judge was going to decide on a few days later. But Dakota Access Pipeline was not waiting. They were going to destroy that land, so it would be a moot point for the judge. And the girls, the women, the boys, the men, they said no. And Native Americans came running from all over and stood in front of the huge earth-crushing bulldozers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them. And they stood there. And they stopped them, and the bulldozers pulled back. And that's when the Dakota Access Pipeline guards unleashed dogs on the protesters, biting them. The guards beating them, macing them, pepper spraying them. But they kept moving forward. They weren't protesters. They were water protectors. That's what they call themselves. And so that's what we call them. They define themselves. And so that's what we went to cover there. And we showed the dogs with their mouths and noses covered in blood. They were biting the Native Americans. And when I am invited into the network studios to talk about any issue, I say, why aren't you talking more about the climate crisis? And of course, as we know, like the pandemic, it disproportionately affects the most vulnerable populations. And they would say, well, the executives say that there aren't enough eyeballs or people on this, that people aren't interested. We posted this video of these protests online. There were more than 14 million views within 24 hours. Any corporate executive would drool at that number. People did care. And then we had to leave. We came back to New York, where we broadcast from, and it got more and more heated. And on that Thursday before the judge's decision on Friday, the governor of North Dakota called out the National Guard. It did not look good for the Native Americans. And then they quietly, without me knowing it, the authorities issued an arrest warrant for me. An arrest warrant for me? Why? Because we were filming, we were showing the images on the ground, giving primacy to the voices of Native Americans, claiming their land, but not only their land, claiming what they felt was necessary to sustain the planet. I had to go up to Canada with my co-host Nermeen Sheikh of Democracy Now! We were there for the Toronto International Film Festival. They were showing a film on independent media about I.F. Stone, the great muckraking journalist. The film was called, well, I.F. Stone said to young journalists, if you can remember 2 words, remember governments lie. If you can remember 3 words, remember all governments lie. And that was the name of the documentary. And we spoke afterwards about the importance of independent media. And the next day, as we were speaking at University of Toronto, I got a text, you're under arrest. I thought, what are they talking about? Did someone hack my phone? But it was true. We raced back to the United States. And I thought, we have to challenge this, because young journalists, young people who don't have institutions that support them, need to know that this warning that the North Dakota authorities issued was a warning not just to me, but to all journalists. Do not come to North Dakota, which is why we had to go back, why all needed to be showing this. The media spotlight had to be on who was there to save the planet. And when we got there, they dropped the lower charges, were to bring felony charges against me. And I asked how much time we had before I was arraigned. And the lawyers there said, you have 3 days. We covered the protest, broadcast in front of the courtroom, the jail, and the 10 Commandments in between. And then I was going to turn myself in. Native Americans came from everywhere to show solidarity. And because of the attention, a journalist is about to be arrested and taken into custody. Then the BBC and Al Jazeera, all the big networks are covering this. But at the same time, the Native Americans that day that were going to court on misdemeanor and felony charges, a number of them had their charges dropped. That's the kind of reality TV we need, that shines the spotlight in the right direction, that shines the spotlight on the people at the grassroots. And so many of you are grassroots activists who are working to better the planet. And that is the majority of people, I think, in this country and around the world. That's the majority of people that don't get shown in the corporate networks. I really do believe that those who care about peace, who care about racial and economic justice, who care about LGBTQ issues, who care about climate crisis, who care about the pandemic, about healthcare, about who survives on this planet, are not a fringe minority, not even a silent majority, but the silenced majority, silenced by the corporate media, which is why we have to take the media back. All of us together. I see the media and democracy movement as part and parcel of the pro-democracy movements in this country. And I call all the movements here, just like we talk about in other countries, they're pro-democracy movements here as well. Because you never achieve democracy. You have to fight for it every single day. And that's what we document every day on Democracy Now! I really look forward to this conversation with Jane and with all of you, and am so honored to be a part of this celebration, because there are, in this time of darkness of the pandemic, in this time when we recognize how this country has failed, we are the richest country in the planet. And yet, with less than 5% of the world's population, we've had 20% of the world's deaths and infections. How is it possible? It's larger than the pandemic. This is a moment of questioning, where we all must come together. And we see what's happened at this time. We see, for example, the elections and what they resulted in. I think Donald Trump represented literally and metaphorically a wall. Now that wall with Biden and Harris has become a door. I'm not saying the door is open. No, in fact, I think it's not even quite open yet. But whether that door will be kicked open or remain shut doesn't depend on those who occupy the White House. It depends on everyone else. It depends on the movement shaping the future. And that is what gives me the most hope of all. This is an absolutely critical moment where everyone's voice can be heard. And we have to ensure that those institutions are there to amplify those voices that have been fighting for so long, so hard, that are closest to the ground. Democracy Now!
Amy, that is great. So yes, it's scary. It's a lot of work, and we have to take risks. And some of these risks are personal, like it could be your life, it could be this. So in thinking about democracy and the way we define democracy, every now and then we have moments of hope, like the Arab Spring or an election of somebody or an idea, right? And for a moment, we all galvanize around that. And then within time, it fizzles, or the powers that be crush it. So what is it that we are fighting for at some point? Like what can we look to and say, like, this is what we want a state to be or a city to be, then move out, because it's so elusive, right? So what's the it in democracy, right? Because
I think it is ensuring that everyone is at the table in determining how our communities are protected, how people not only survive, but thrive in their communities. And survival literally is what matters right now in this country. Whether we're talking about access to treatment, for example, when it comes to COVID-19, or whether we're talking about access to vaccines, it is critical that every community be there. And we see where treatment and vaccines are accessible matters, and that the closer you have them to the ground, the more people will be able to protect each other. And I see the United States as a microcosm of the world. We're hearing all these words like vaccine nationalism, vaccine apartheid, in the same way that it's just inexcusably low, the number of vaccines doses that have been given to communities of color in this country. We were interviewing a doctor in New York who's head of an emergency room, and he was one of the first to get the vaccine himself because he was treating people. And he said those 2 doses that he got in his arm, his name is Dr. Craig Spencer. He worked in West Africa for years. He got Ebola at the time of the epidemic. He said those 2 vaccines he got in his arm is more than 130 countries have gotten doses of vaccine. More than 130 countries, just those 2 doses. And that we, instead of sending armaments to other countries, what about vaccines? And what about ensuring one thing this pandemic has taught us is that when one person is sick anywhere, we are all threatened. None of us is safe, which is why we all have to protect each other. And I think that also is a metaphor for us in every aspect of our lives. that the only way we are going to be able to go forward is that we ensure everyone can.
So I think about my own history. Like, I'm from Kenya. My parents grew up under colonial rule. I'm in Chicago fighting for basic rights, right? For people to have housing. I have kids. At what point is this like the fate of life? Like, we're just going to continue on this road? Or at what point, just like trying to that question, like at what point do we say, like, yes, we have it? Or is it, this is it? Like, at every generation will have to fight for what this thing that's a little elusive.
Oh, I think we have to struggle and fight. You never, as I said, you never achieve democracy. You fight for it every day. But I want to say, I think the young people of this country and the youngest, Democracy Now!, we do the broadcast every morning at 8. That's your time, 7 o'clock in the morning, but 8 o'clock in New York. And then afterwards, well, in the past, when we were in our physical space, classrooms of kids would come, whether it's fifth graders, whether it's graduate students in journalism, whether it's Iraqi journalists from Baghdad. We would always have discussions afterwards about what we had talked about and what independent media is. Now, every week, I do that with our education department, and we do it on Zoom. We do it with kids in the South Bronx, some in their classrooms, most at home, some not having even access to be able to show their faces on video. We know about this lost generation. But I think the young people are the heroes of our day right now, what they are doing in this year. So, how affected they are, and how we have all come to understand how important community is, and how much we need each other. That's the hope I see right now. And I think that goes across the political spectrum. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about the white supremacists who attacked the Capitol. I'm not talking about what they tried to stop in the whole democratic process. I'm talking about the vast majority of people in this country who understand we all need each other. And I think this is a huge moment of displacement and disorientation. And I think so much good can come out of it when people's voices are elevated. And that's what we have to do right now.
Okay. Thanks, Amy. It's an ongoing question. So we have a few from the chat, and there's one from Barbara Phillips, our friend. And what she's asking, do you think the National Democratic Party understands that democracy is at stake?
That's a very good question. I think the Democratic Party is made up of many different, I don't want to say factions, but many different movements. And just take a look at what passed in Congress. And that is the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. What Harris and Biden are going around the country now talking about. It is extremely significant. And the amount of progressive pressure it took to get there, we cannot underestimate what this means. It didn't come from the top. This came from people risking everything during this pandemic to go out and vote, to make their demands heard. And people in Congress understood they could not defy them. This is an enormous grassroots victory. The idea that a half of children will be hopefully raised out of poverty. This comes from so many people risking their lives to vote. And then ultimately what happened in Georgia is just astounding, that took the Senate from the Republicans to ultimately the Democrats. And we'll see what happens with the filibuster, slavery, coming out of the slavery and Jim Crow eras. guaranteeing a tremendous power to the minority. But if that is challenged, I mean, and what we see right now with what has taken place, just a huge progressive victory. And that might just be the beginning. We will see.
Okay, thanks. I have another 2 more questions, and then we'll bring this to a close. There's a question from Susan Eleuterio. Do you think Deb Haaland will have the powers and support she needs to impact the pipeline and other projects like this?
And who said that? Who asked the question?
Susan Eleuterio, she's our friend.
Oh,
She's our friend.
Maybe you watched Democracy Now! Today. We had a woman named Leona Morgan on, who I had met about, a number of years ago. In the old days when we were together, we traveled through the country and we broadcast from many different places. We were in Los Alamos, the birthplace of the nuclear age. And Leona Morgan, who is a DNA Navajo anti-nuclear activist, came to speak with us that day. And today we had her back on. Okay, now she was in Albuquerque and she was on Skype. But she talked about the significance of Deb Haaland becoming the Interior Secretary of this country, the first Native American to serve in a presidential cabinet. I mean, the significance of this, what she will now deal with, among many issues, are the legacy of uranium mining in this country, particularly on Native land. And this is so important. She'll also be dealing with nuclear issues. She'll be dealing with, to say the least, the fossil fuel industry. Deb Haaland, remember, was one of the first 2 Native Congresswomen to be elected in 2018. You know where she was in 2016, and which is why I emphasize so much what happened at Standing Rock. She was there at Standing Rock, and the activism, the indigenous leadership that came out of Standing Rock, we're only seeing the beginning of today. One of Trump's first actions in office was to greenlight the Keystone XL pipeline and the Dakota Access Pipeline. Biden comes in, he reverses Keystone, but he has yet to comment on the Dakota Access Pipeline, though many are organizing around that, not to mention challenging the Enbridge 3 line in Minnesota. This is, much larger than pipeline politics. It's about how we are going to live and sustain this planet. But Deb Haaland is such a significant victory, not only for Native Americans, for indigenous people, but and not only for progressives, but for this country.
Yeah, thank you. We have a question here from somebody. Amy, you likened the current Biden-Harris administration to a door, albeit one that is not currently open. What do you think it would take to open that door?
Well, I mean, I think that's what, we cover all of you being involved with opening these doors every day. And I would throw that question back to everyone. What is it you're going to do to make a difference? That is true democracy working. And we are far from that at this point. But there is possibility. I mean, just think about, in the midst of the pandemic, in the midst of the horror of the killing of George Floyd, the thousands of people led by the Black Lives Matter movement who marched in the streets, yes, socially distanced, protecting each other, but protecting everyone by saying, we're going to get out here and we're going to change the way this country is run. It is those movements that make such an enormous difference. And we need a media that projects those voices. It's not just a debate between the most conservative and a little less conservative that we see on the corporate networks. there are debates across the political spectrum where we have to honestly provide a forum for people to hash out these issues that we can all hear each other. And I think that is the critical challenge of our day, is how this democracy gets shaped. And I think there is tremendous opportunity around that, whether we're talking about Green New Deal, whether we're talking about racial and economic justice, whether we're talking about LGBTQ and trans issues, all of these issues, whether we're talking about, war and peace. We need a media that allows the conversations to happen.
Mm-hmm. How do you organize media? Because it sometimes gets lonely when you're doing this work as a lone voice. So how do you organize the rest of mainstream media? Do you call up people, or what would it take, even in your position, to organize that?
I mean, I think social media and the internet offer tremendous possibility and peril. Social media can be a huge rumor mill, but can also be an incredible means of organizing if everyone has access to it. And that's the digital divide is extremely serious and something that we have to take on. But that challenges the gatekeepers of the traditional corporate media. I think they have to be challenged. I think, they are using public airwaves and always pushing to get new, fresh, younger voices on, and also people building their own media, ensuring that all of these different voices are heard is absolutely critical.
Okay, thank you. So, Amy, thank you so much. And for folks who are listening, you can continue listen to Amy on Democracy Now! Buy the books, just follow her. And I just want to thank you for your generosity. And we have two requests. One is from me. I'd love for you to do your signature peace sign, and we'll all do it with you. So here we go.
Oh, okay.
And also Zazu. There's a demand for Zazu. Yes. So there we go. Thank you, Amy. You are great. You are awesome. And just thank you for all that you do. And we appreciate you and Zazu.
So much.
Thank you. That was awesome. So before Emmanuel comes back to take us through the rest of the program, we'd like to leave you with these words from Arundhati Roy, who I quoted earlier. Her challenge to us is, and it's a similar challenge to what Amy has for us, what world do we want to live in when the pandemic is over? In Arundhati's voice, this is what she says. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks, and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly, with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. What will we choose to do? Welcome back, Manny.
Thank you, Jane. What an incredible conversation. And I'm so glad that we got to meet Zazu. Something that I'm sitting with that Amy said was, you never achieve democracy. You have to fight for it every single day. Now, I want to welcome Crossroads Fund board member, co-chair, Henry Cervantes.
Hi, everybody. My name is Henry Cervantes, and I serve as board co-chair of the Crossroads Fund. What an incredible conversation between Amy Goodman and Jane Kimondo. They are absolutely right that grassroots movements for social justice need our support now more than ever. Here at Crossroads Fund, we are committed to doing just that. This past year alone, we were able to secure $1.2 million to fund 130 groups working for social justice in the Chicago metropolitan area. 130 groups who were able to secure the financial resources to carry on their work, to be proactive, visionary, and transformative during these unprecedented times of change. Crossroads Fund is a public foundation, which means that you and I and our friends make Crossroads what it is, a reliable funder. Tonight, we celebrate 40 years of funding grassroots movement for social justice. So tonight, I'm going to ask you to join us in celebrating these 40 years of funding social justice work. Please help us continue to be a reliable funder for another 40 years to support the next generation of activists and visionaries working to make an impact for a more just society. Your gift tonight, whether it's $400, $4,000, or $40,000, any amount would be deeply appreciated. We would be honored to count on your support to help fund social justice work here in the city of Chicago. Please consider making a gift in any amount that can help us reach our goal of raising $200,000. There are many ways to give. You can even sign up to be a monthly sustainer and give little over time. Thank you for believing in our work. And on behalf of the Crossroads Fund Board of Directors, we thank you for being a partner in this fight. Thanks.
Thank you, Henry. And thank you to everyone making a contribution right now. We're 60% of our fundraising goal of raising $200,000. Don't forget to register to bid on silent auction items. It closes this Friday, March 19 at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. Tomorrow is our 2021 awards presentation. And Friday, we have a special musical performance by Jamila Woods. So we have a date at 7 p.m. tomorrow and Friday. So tell your friends. See you soon. Thank you and good night.
Hush now, child, and don't cry. Your folks might understand you by and by. Just move on up toward your destination. Though you may find from time to time complications. Bite your lip and take the trip. Though there may be wet road ahead and you cannot slip, just move on up for peace you'll find. Into the steeple of beautiful people where there's only one kind. So hush now, child, and don't cry. Your folks might understand you by and by. Move on up and keep on wishing. Remember your dream is your only scheme, so keep on pushing. Take nothing less than the supreme best. Do not obey, rumors people say that we can pass the test. Just move on up to a greater day. With just a little faith, if you put your mind to it, you can surely do it.